I want to talk about heart and why humanity is really being called back to heart in these times. And I want to talk about frequency, energy, vibration, and why those things too are really important in these times. And I want to talk about like attracting like. So this could be called law of attraction. It could be labeled as so many different things, but really it's about coming into the energy of things. And why this is so important for us to focus on individually, but also collectively, because we are going through such massive transformation, which is really exciting, but also very destabilizing for some. And so my sense, my feeling, my knowing is that this can't be approached, this transition can't be approached through a mental state alone. We have to really drop into heart, and we have to understand the language of frequency and how we have an immense amount of power to change our world. It's down to us, actually. And this simple act of dropping into heart and raising our frequency would have a profound effect. So that's what we're going to dive into today. This is Corinne Bloom, and you're listening to Raw Conversations. So I appreciate that for some, these topics might be a little bit, abstract or far out. So if you're here with me, I hope that your curiosity can, lead you to stay a little and find out. We'll see where it goes. So heart. Let's begin with heart. I talk a lot about heart, and we've been primarily living from our brain, as I've also talked a lot about, and primarily our left brain and the masculine within us. And, this has been a pattern for, some say centuries, that really humanity has kind of lost its heart. And I would say primarily because we've just been disconnected from our true nature. And that most likely happened when we were disconnected from nature and defined as being separate to nature. I love how Zach Bush said we went wrong when the dictionary defined nature as that which is not man and that which is not man-made. And, to sever ourselves from our true nature, that's where you start to go off path, basically. The moment you sever yourself from who you are and what you are, things go a little bit, wonky and sideways, and look at where we are now, right? So really understanding the nature of our being, and part of that is that we are intrinsically connected and a part of nature. And then you could go into a more spiritual realm, if you will, where we are divine beings having this human experience. So there's many different angles, but the point of what I'm trying to share is that we're not just the mind, we're not just the left brain, we're not just the masculine. We are this beautiful balance and this kind of complex system of a multitude of different energies. So the masculine and feminine really needing to find that balance again within us. Again, I love the image that indigenous people will say that we've been, the bird has been flying with one wing just in circles, and how we're needing to reinstate the other wing so that we can properly fly and we can be in equilibrium. So we need the masculine and the feminine. And when we lose the feminine, when we lose the connection to nature, which is innately, I don't want to just say it's only feminine, but nature has a very feminine quality, but again, it has the balance of both, right? And one isn't better or worse, and this is not gender-based. This is not man, woman. This is masculine, feminine, which we all have within us. It's an energy. And God, I could do a whole other podcast on how the masculine and feminine affect men and women. So I'll note that down, that I'll do another one on that, a different podcast on that. But these beautiful feminine qualities of attunement and intuition and creativity and relatedness, connectivity, the circle. We've lost all of these things, or we've forgotten, or we've been severed from. I mean, I for me, that last word really rings true, because kind of there's been an infiltration of our innate way of being, which, if you've followed me, I truly believe that as humans, we are innately compassionate, loving, kind beings. And when you drop into your heart, you recognize that that is so. Like, that is just truth. But these kind of, things come in and they get really convoluted, and we'll go into frequency a little bit later, but it kind of wants to pull that apart and sever, because actually we are most powerful when we are in our heart. And science is now proving this, that the vibration, the quantum field that comes off of the heart or the magnetic field, I should say, is tremendous. It's so powerful. The mind is very powerful, of course, as well, but the mind is very easily manipulated. So you have to be really mindful, really careful. But the heart is this just amazing center of, oh God, I don't know, existence. And it can be such an incredible guide. Now, so imagine that we've just been disconnected from this part of us, and we've been kind of indoctrinated or trained to be in our mind. Someone was saying that school doesn't teach you what to think. It teaches you how to think. No, sorry. The opposite. It doesn't teach you how to think. It teaches you what to think. You need to think this. These are the paradigms. These are the definitions. These are the labels. This is what this looks like, what that looks like. It's telling you what to think. But how to think is a totally different thing. It's a totally different creature in and of itself. Like, really how to think. Like, we don't think laterally very much. We don't think critically very much. We can't hold oppositions. We can't hold polarity, because we're really now more than ever, my God, in these last 3 years more than ever, we've really been thrown into polarization and into black and white and binary and all of these things. And it's really, it's like breaking down who we are as humans, because we have, again, just such a great capacity on so many various levels. And it's like we're being really broken down to a very simple form, but simple not in a good way, I would say. I'm all for simplicity, but this is a bit like stripping us of our true nature. The quickest way to disconnect from your heart is to firstly disconnect you from your true nature. So let's disconnect you from the nature that is around you, that is you. And fear. Let's keep you in your survival mode. Let's keep you in a mental loop of you're not good enough, you're not worthy, you don't know, you don't have any wisdom, you don't have any inner authority. And you have no connection to that which is greater to you, whether it be nature, the divine, the universe, God, your higher self, that you do not have that connection unless you go through some other avenue, some medium. And that's a lie. That is an illusion, because each one of us is not even just a vessel. We just are that. If you want to call it consciousness, you are consciousness. If you want to call it God, you are God. If you want to call it the universe, you are the universe. So getting out of this whole kind of needing some mediary to connect you or give you a greater knowing or wisdom than what you already have. Now, if we're not connected to our heart, it's going to be really difficult for us to access the knowing and the wisdom that we do have, because it's not a mental thing. It's a heart. The heart is the main portal, the main doorway. And then we can go into frequency, and I will get to like attracts like, I promise. Sometimes I forget things, but I promise I'll remember. So what is the quickest way of dropping into heart? And I want to talk about this, both why this is important individually and also collectively. So let me just go to the macro first, the collective. Our world is in chaos, right? Like, I think we all see that. And I'm kind of taking a break from it, if I'm really honest, because it can get really loud. And once you kind of see the formula, you understand how it works. And if you haven't seen the formula yet, that's okay. That's a process of learning, and everyone, gets to it in their own time. And there are probably many different formulas. I'm not claiming to have the one answer, the one way, or that I'm right and everyone's wrong. That's no. But why heart is so important on a collective level is because it's chaotic out there, and the mind, isn't necessarily the best guide. Critical thinking, yeah, that's important. But the mind isn't necessarily the best guide because, again, what we're kind of being thrown into in the midst of this chaos is polarity and division. And so heart is, if we were to just drop into heart, and if we were to raise our frequency, certain things on this planet couldn't happen anymore. They would have no power because we have to feed it. It's like a parasite that needs sugar in order for it to keep growing and perpetuating whatever, havoc it's wreaking in your system. It needs sugar. And if you don't give it sugar, it can't survive. So if we don't give the chaos, more drama, more negativity, more anger, and I want to talk about anger as a frequency later. I'll try and remember. More division, more polarity, more just fighting against each other. That's the sugar, right? And as far as frequency, that is, you could say, dropping into a lower frequency. It's more dense, it's more heavy, it's more dull. It doesn't have a vibrating, alive, what's the word I'm looking for? Consciousness, right? It's very low consciousness, you could say. And so if we were to just choose to drop into heart and to be in a state of greater kindness and compassion towards one another, just the things that are lower than that, just you take away the sugar, it can't survive. And so if you look out at the world and you think, oh my God, this is chaos and it's a disaster and the evil that's out there, you have the choice if you want to continue to collude with it and perpetuate it, or to say, you know what, no, this can't happen anymore. And actually where I do have power, because if you look at all the individual things, it's so easy to feel powerless. You go, well, what do I do? What can I do about it? And, maybe there are certain avenues and people that are, fighting for different causes and, bringing about different, educating people or whatever. And that's fantastic. But actually the one thing that we can all do right now from our home, from wherever we are, without any kind of true knowledge whatsoever, is drop in your heart. Drop into your heart and choose to go about your life, your day, your interactions with people, your relationships, your family, your friends, strangers. Choose to be led by heart. What would heart do in this situation? What would love do in this situation? What would compassion do in this situation? Now, the reason why it's hard for humans to do that on a mass scale, on the macro, the collective, is because if you don't know how to do that with yourself, it becomes more difficult to do that with others, because the moment you get triggered, somebody has a different opinion than you. Somebody has a different perspective than you. Somebody's doing something that you were, taught, no, that's wrong, or that's politically incorrect, or this or that, the other, and there's whatever, the mind can go into that. You're going to really easily get spun out. And then you're going to go back into that hatred and anger and I'm right and you're wrong and let's argue about this and let's debate. I mean, all you need to do is go on social media and see what that looks like, right? It's terrible. It's really painful to look at. It's really ugly. So in order for us to really drop into heart and change the world, which I 1,000,000% believe that we can do, and I actually think it's that simple. I really, really do. But in order to do that, we have to do the inner work, right? As within, so without. The outer world is the reflection of the inner world. And the only way that you can really drop into heart and drop into love is you have to accept yourself. And you have to accept your entire self. So in the quote unquote spiritual community, where they talk a lot about vibration and frequency, and you gotta keep a high vibe all the time, high vibe, high frequency, positivity. In and of itself, there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like, yes, I could say I agree. We need to keep our frequency up. We need to keep our vibration up, but not at the expense of suppressing, oppressing, and denying and neglecting your humanity, your pain, which therefore means your sadness, which therefore means your anger, because if you're coming up from the layers from the core out, the onion, core of the onion to the outer layer of the outer skin, what you see with people that, what is coined spiritual bypassing is they're like, yeah, I'm positive, I'm happy, I'm good, I'm high vibe. But actually, if they're ignoring and neglecting and denying their humanity and deeming their humanity as something negative and low vibe, low frequency. So I wanted to clarify something I said in my last podcast where I said your humanity, like, oh, low frequency, like, no. Yes, certain states can bring us into a lower frequency, but if you know how to work with things like anger as a messenger and as something that you need to alchemize, it's just attuning you to something. It's getting your attention about something. If you work with it, none of our emotions are low frequency. What brings us into low frequency is if we stay unconsciously in areas of negativity, anger, hatred, resentment, judgment, envy. Then yes, you can drop into a low frequency and you kind of reside there. But I really want to make that distinction that anger doesn't necessarily have to be a low frequency emotion, right? It's a messenger and you gotta heed it. If you don't heed it and you oppress it, that's when it gets into murky waters. That's what has the connotation of, oh, that's a low frequency vibe, as some people might say. Because that's what that's called is neglect or oppression or ignoring. Right? So either what happens with this spiritual bypassing is all of that stuff comes out passive aggressively, like, oh, I'm high vibe, I'm super positive, but actually they're really passive aggressive about things. And that they're high vibe and positive until something happens. The shit hits the fan or something really big happens in their life or something triggers them. And then all of a sudden they lose the plot and they cannot handle it. They cannot handle the loss, the grief, the pain, because they've spent their whole, whatever time ignoring, neglecting. Oh no, those are bad emotions. That's a low vibe. That's negative emotions. And what do? They stuff it down. There is no away. You cannot put things away. You stuff them down and they're still in you until the only way of, and I've talked about this a lot, what we might quote unquote say away is you have to alchemize it. You have to transmute it, which means you got to face it. You got to sit with it. You got to breathe into it. You got to feel it. Most importantly, you got to listen to it. Then you work with it and then it transforms into something else. And then you don't hold on to it anymore. Anger, sadness, envy, jealousy, judgment, all of these are incredibly malleable in the sense that we can transform them. But it's not because I'm going, oh, that's bad and I want to change it into something else. It's like, no, I'm going to listen to why this is here. There's always a reason. There's always a reason for our behavior. There's always a reason for why we feel things. And we've got to start paying attention to them. They are not bad. They are not sinful. They are not in and of themselves negative and low vibe and low frequency. If you don't pay attention to them, yes, they can become that. But if you pay attention to them as they arise, they can be incredibly wise. They are wise. It's a guidance system. It's a language to understand ourselves. So this is why it's so important to do this inner work. and to accept all of ourselves. And this is what I was saying last week. Like, I feel like my gift, how I can be of service to humanity, is to show, and I walk my talk, like I'm doing all of this for myself as well, but it's to understand how, and to really learn and know and embody how to accept our entire humanity, no matter what you think, feel, or experience. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with you, right? Even if you have bad, terrible thoughts, that's okay. What is it revealing? What is it showing you? What needs your loving attention? Where do you need to refocus? But all of it is an invitation to come into yourself and to come back home to yourself. And home is in your heart. So in order to change the outer world, we have to visit our inner world. And on a side note, we're experiential beings. So, we learn through embodiment. We learn through experience. It can't just be through knowledge, right? You can read 1,000 books, and if you don't put that knowledge into action, it doesn't really mean that much. You might be able to spit out some great facts, but if you don't walk your talk, and if you don't embody that, and if you don't take your knowledge and wisdom and put it into action, and therefore into experience, and then you really gain the wisdom through the experience, it just doesn't mean that much. You got a library of, a great eclectic library, but if you're not showing up differently, you're not utilizing the knowledge that you have. Similarly, you can't travel around you have a breadth of experience, and your knowledge and your mind expands by traveling, right? You go out and you see the world, you go to different countries, you go to different cultures, and you inevitably grow and expand through that experience. People that stay at home and watch videos on YouTube about the world, it's just not the same thing. Sure, you can see some pretty things, you can get an idea, you can absolutely build a certain kind of knowledge and awareness, but it's just not going to expand you in the same way as going out there and doing it in reality, in the real world, in the felt sense and experience. So that's just, I'm putting that in as a side note of like, it's the age of information and over information, but there's nothing like experience. And that's how children learn, right? Now going into frequency, because that's another thing, right? Like, so taking that example, someone that goes out into the world and has been in the experience of speaking to and observing and being in different cultures, you could say, let's say it's a vaster, wider, maybe like the periphery is wider, right? The experience of that is wider than someone that has just kind of been learning that in a book or on YouTube, right? And the thing is once you've expanded yourself, you can see back to how you were maybe not as expanded. But if you haven't expanded yourself yet, it's really hard to know what that's like. So when people talk about frequency of higher or lower, which I don't want to say superior or inferior, it's just look at it as like walking up steps, right? Or going up scales. Same thing with frequency, like or dimensions. People have talked about this as dimensions. When you've gone into higher frequencies or higher dimensions, you can look back. So let's say you've climbed up the steps or you've climbed up the mountain. You can look down and you know where you've come, right? So you can see the level of where you're at, but you can also go back down to where you were because you know you've traveled that, right? If you're on the lower step, or if you're at the bottom of the mountain, you cannot see up. You cannot see it. You might have an idea, you might have a sense, but you have no idea because you haven't traveled that distance yet. So that's why they say, lower dimensions can't go above to higher dimensions unless they've done the work to get there. You have to do the work to climb up the steps, or you have to do the work to climb up the mountain. But once you're up there, you can see all of the dimensions, all of the steps, all of the part of the mountain that you've already traversed. You see and you understand that. Again, it can only happen through experience. And if you haven't traveled the outer world and you can't travel the outer world, you have the amazing free trip of going into your inner world. into your innerverse, into the inner cosmos, and you'll find actually in the end that they're one and the same. They're interconnected, right? But we really are at a time where it's like, go explore. Go explore either the outer world or your inner world and climb the steps. Climb the mountain. Because from an energetic perspective, we're really being called to do this. We're being called to drop into heart, which is the portal. That is the doorway. Because already if you drop into heart, that is a very high frequency. And again, if you need science to prove this, there's plenty to show the frequency, the hertz. That's actually another interesting thing. Okay, I want to give 2 stories and examples about the power of heart and frequency. So when it comes to just hertz, I was watching this video of this guy had a tuning fork that was set up, and I think it was like 430 hertz, something around there. And to the side of it was a ball on a string. And then about like a couple inches or, 10 centimeters, maybe not 10 centimeters, like much less than that, just a small space between the tuning fork. He had another tuning fork, but it was a different frequency. And so he was, hitting that fork, but it wasn't having any effect on the other one. But then when he brought the same hertz, so 430 hertz next to the 430 hertz, and he started ringing that one through the space in between, it made the other one vibrate, and therefore it started to hit the ball, right? So the higher frequency, the difference in frequency wouldn't do it, but the similar frequency would do it, would create the vibration and knock the ball. And so it was just showing how frequency travels and it affects. And this goes into like attracts like, which I kind of wanted to get to that a little bit later. But the point of that is that how energy and frequency moves and how it affects other things. So what was kind of interesting is that the difference in frequencies didn't have the same kind of effect. And I think this is, people that are in relationship where maybe the frequency is really different between you two. It's hard to kind of harmonize, and you need that lower frequency to come up to match the higher frequency for there to be attunement, or the higher frequency has to come down to the lower frequency to create that kind of attunement. However, when we normally drop into lower frequencies, you see in the context of relationship, people like drama, or they argue, or, they get into these kind of patterns of what we would call like negative loops. But the moment one shifts into a higher frequency and goes, no, I don't want to play that game. I don't want to be in that loop of just negative. I mean, I don't like to use positive and negative, but whatever, of shouting at each other, of drama, being triggered, of not doing the self-work to have self-awareness, to be able to consciously choose to make a different choice, to be able to consciously change that dynamic. The relationship won't work after a certain point because the higher frequency will go, but it feels shitty to be in that loop. I don't want to do that anymore. And the lower frequency will be like, well, this doesn't work because why aren't you arguing with me? Why aren't you giving me that kind of, that energy back? Because we need that kind of mutual reciprocal energy, because we're relatable beings, right? We're constantly in this energetic dance with each other. So that's a bit of a tangent, but it's interesting to look at it in the context of relationship and how different levels of frequency, and I could go into consciousness as well, but I won't go into that now. It makes it hard to be in a harmonious relationship. Not impossible, but they're just, you're on different planes on the stairwell, right? Different landings. Now, I want to give a personal example of the power of energy, frequency, and especially when it comes from heart. And I have to say, I'm so grateful for all of the practice I did in my 20s when I had a Buddhist practice at the time of doing metta, which is loving kindness, where you send compassion and love, that energy from your heart to the world, to all beings, to someone specific. The highest form of it is to your enemy or to those that you don't like, and then of course to yourself, right? So I had enough of a practice of understanding what that was like and understanding frequency. So this, going back to, it must have been the end of 2020. It was the second lockdown. And I was in a place that was incredibly militant, very kind of like police state, authoritative. I mean, a lot of places were, but this was quite extreme. And we had one yellow day, which meant it was right before Christmas, and you could go out and you could, the bars were open. So people were like, clearly wanted to go out and be amongst other people, have a drink. And so it was outside, and there were 3 tables. And I was with, my table, and then, there was, 2 other tables. And the head police, sheriff, chief, whatever you call it from wherever you're listening to from, he is known as being just an asshole, like really just very taking advantage of his power. And he showed up and everyone's like, oh God, the one time, the one night that we can go out. Here he comes and shows up and everybody's kind of, tense, and he comes in with this real macho kind of just negative energy. My God, again, I don't like to use that term, but just, the abuse of power. You could feel it. And so he collects everyone's documents and he goes inside and he has to, write it all out. And everyone's kind of talking about and pissed off and, he's infamous for being a bit of a dick. So, and I just sat there and I was like, okay, I'm just going to drop into my heart and I'm going to blast him with love and compassion, because he's so easy to hate, really easy to hate, because he's just comes across as really a terrible human being. But I'm like, I'm just going to blast him with love and compassion, and I'm going to radiate that energy from myself. I'm going to cover the whole table with this love and light, and just drop into my heart and just send him love. And I'm not going to drop into the drama and the negativity and the hate and the conflict and the power abuse and the fear. I'm actually not even going to drop into the fear, because it's intimidating when somebody like that comes and you realize you're helpless and you don't have any authority. And especially in this country, there's a big power play between the police and the people. It's really, really unhealthy. It's terrible. It feels awful. So it's really easy to go into that. But I'm like, no, I'm not going to feed the fear. I'm just going to stay in love, in compassion, in my heart. So then he comes out, and I'm a foreigner. So he has to ask me all these questions. I'm like, fuck, there's a part of me that's like, he's so going to give me a ticket or I'm going to get in trouble. And I'm like, nope, going to keep on sending him love, going to keep on sending him compassion. And he asked me questions and I answered them nicely. And then he went back in and and he came out. Long story short, my table, no one got a ticket. No one got a fine. The other 2 tables got tickets and fines. And I just thought that is the living example of when you put yourself into a higher frequency, when you put yourself into the frequency of love and you're connected to your heart. That is the power of compassion. That is the power of love and heart. You're untouchable, because that frequency can't, you're not giving it the sugar. So the parasite can't attack you. You're not giving it the sugar. Now, does that happen every time? I don't know. Sometimes shit happens and you do end up getting something and you can't beat yourself up of being like, oh, I was too low vibe. Sometimes shit really does happen. And, whatever, we got to work with it. That's, how we want to respond to it is our responsibility and our choice. And it shouldn't bog us down and pull us down and then go, oh, this doesn't work. It really does work. And actually, the more that we practice, I'm not going to play that game. I'm not going to drop into that frequency. And by the way, I'm saying this on a kind of large abstract level, but you can really do this in the micro world, right? With yourself, with your partner, with your family, with your friends, with your children. It's all one and the same, right? And this is why I'm saying it's very important to do this on the micro level and work on this within ourselves. And then you can take that out into the world. And we have to do whatever work we're doing right now, we're doing it for ourselves and for the collective. It's just, there is no separation anymore. But it just was such a strong, clear, powerful, potent example of the power of frequency, the power of heart and love and compassion. And so I always remember that, like if you know anything about Joe Dispenza and like the quantum field, like, yeah, put that energy out into the quantum field and notice what happens. Notice how it changes things. Notice how, like, I don't want to say the bad shit doesn't touch the sides, right? Because it's also not to say that, we aren't going to be met with obstacles and challenges, because sometimes they're there for a reason and they're there as a messenger and they're there to get our attention and we need to work through something, or maybe we still have something to learn. But basically, just don't be the sugar that feeds the parasite. Know that life is going to be filled with challenges and obstacles, and there are going to be hard times. And just because there are hard times doesn't mean that you're in a negative, low frequency. But I think you get my point. There's a difference. The people that are walking through life unconsciously and they're in a victim role and, this always happens to me in life and da-da and this and that and the other, and they keep on attracting more stuff. Well, yeah. Shit, I want to talk about like attracts like, and I'm already 35 minutes in. Okay, it's going to be a long one, folks, but I'm going to try and touch on it as quickly as possible. Like attracts like for, there could be various reasons for it, and I'm not claiming to be the expert. But again, when you're looking at it from a frequency level, like with the example of the tuning forks, you could literally see the connection, right? So that the 430 hertz tuning fork that was, rung, and that affected the other one, right? You could literally see the vibration moving between, and then this ball being, pinged to the side because of the vibration. So if like attracts like, similar frequency will attract similar frequency. That's why in law of attraction, it's really important for the individual to do the inner work, because if you're coming from a not enough or not good enough or not lovable enough or not worthy enough, you could say that that's a kind of frequency. And so you will attract something that is similar to that. Now, with that said, this is really tricky territory, because I know a lot of people will say, well, I didn't call in an abusive partner. I didn't call in this or that or the other. I don't deserve that. Or that's not fair. And it's really nuanced, right? Because I don't believe in the law of attraction that it's like, well, if you're in a down state, then, you attracted the evil, you attracted the abuse, no, because then that can be really self-punishing, or that can be like, God is punishing me or the universe is punishing me. None of this is about punishment. That whole part of like the secret and the law of attraction and, I got to stay positive or else you're going to, attract negative things. That puts us into fear. That's what will bring us into a lower frequency. But that's just a terrible way of living too, right? Because then you're constantly afraid that you're going to do something and have a bad reaction, get something bad in return. And I don't believe it works that way. I do believe that certain situations come up because there's something to learn through them. There's always something to learn. And I know that can be so annoying to hear, but really there's an opportunity, or it's just an experience. And sometimes it's a shitty experience, but at some point we'll reflect back on it and go, oh, okay, I know what I learned from that. Even if that is, I learned how to have greater empathy and compassion for other people who have also gone through something like that, or maybe even worse than me. I had an experience when I was 15 where I was very, very close. I would say the line, especially energetically, but almost physically as well, was nearly crossed by a stepfather of mine who came very close to molesting me. And it really affected me. Actually, years later, it affected me. And I remember being in a hypnotherapy session and having this vision of being in child's pose. And all of this shattered glass was around me. And I understood that all of the shattered glass represented the pain or the suffering or the challenge that I experienced in my life. And I knew that what that meant was because I'd had those experiences, I would have greater compassion and empathy for others that have also experienced challenge and suffering and pain. So when I had that experience when I was 15, thank God it didn't get worse. Thank God it didn't go into like proper molestation. But I look at that and go, you know what? I know the feeling of it. I knew the feeling later of how icky you feel, or how, you know, I could go into the whole story of it, but it's just like I really understood the psychological effect of that, the energetic effect of that, the emotional effect of that, the physical effect of that affected me years later. Like 6 years later, I was dealing with it, even past that. And that wasn't even a full blown, like I can't imagine people that have been properly molested or when they were younger or who have been raped or whatever, but it gave me enough of an understanding to really go, wow, yeah, I can feel into how that might feel for you. So all of our sometimes experiences come up to give us an understanding of what it's like for the human to have that experience, because we're all one, we're all interconnected, and we need to be in a world where we have a hell of a lot more empathy for one another, right? So sometimes shit happens so that you have a greater understanding and a greater empathy for others, should you choose to take it in that conscious form of learning from it and understanding from it, and dropping more into heart, dropping more into love, dropping more into compassion and kindness. And sometimes it's our own, you could call it karma, you could call it life lesson, you could call it soul lesson that your soul wants to learn, whatever, or just experience. It's just an experience. Sometimes, you know, it's easy to say one experience is good and one is bad, or one, you know, is joyful and one is traumatic, and then label it as good or bad. Sometimes our hardest experiences can actually become really our greatest gifts and give us our greatest wisdom and knowledge, and really like create the medicine which we can offer to others. So when you look back and reflect on your life, try to get out of good and bad and look at it more as, what have I learned from this? What have I gained from this? What is the wisdom that I can then offer? And that's the alchemization, right? You take something that was hard for you, and then through your heart, through love, through the healing that comes through love, you can then give that as medicine to others. What a beautiful reciprocation, or what a beautiful alchemization of something that was quote unquote bad, and you turn it into something good, right? And that's where the human is just amazing power to be able to transform and alchemize. So like attract like. Yes, sometimes we have to be aware of what our frequency is, or that's why I work a lot around beliefs. Be mindful of what your beliefs are. If you believe you're not worthy and you're not good enough, you're going to attract things, people, situations in your life that are just going to reflect that back, not to punish you, but to say, hey, this is showing you where you're at. And the moment you do the inner work and you heal and you love yourself and you accept your entire human self, that changes, the story changes, the lens changes, you attract a totally different type of person. So that's like attracts like, right? And you're climbing the steps, you're climbing the mountain. When you go through each layer and you do the work, you take another step, right? And you and then you do raise your frequency, but you don't raise your frequency and your vibe falsely, just to go, I'm positive, but let's just like tuck all of that, let's sweep it all under the rug or stuff it in the closet. At one point, you're going to have to pull the rug back. At one point, you're going to open the closet and all the shit's going to fall on you. So why do that when you can actually just work through it and have a clean house, and then organically and naturally raise your vibration? And you've done it through heart. You've done it through loving everything, all parts of yourself, all of your experiences. And then once we embody that, we can more naturally, organically give that to the world, because you realize you can't do it any other way. You can't judge people because it will hurt you. You can't hate them because it will hurt you when you do it. You can't go into division because it will hurt you. That's why this is an inside out job. So drop into heart by accepting all of who you are. You will naturally climb the steps and rise into a higher frequency. And you will then really understand, like attracts like, and you'll be able to call in beautiful things into your life and create a beautiful world around you. We absolutely have the power, but we've got to do all of those steps first. So, as always, take it or leave it as feels right for you. If anything triggers you, take it as an invitation to be curious and learn more about it within yourself. And as always, loving you from afar. You've been listening to Raw Conversations with Corinne Bloom. Thanks so much for showing up, listening in, and being a part of the conversation with me.